Welcome to the Little Johnny Chronicles number 29, the Darkness series, episode 8. This is a tier 1 intro. We've been talking about tier 3 and tier 2 types of characters. In the last episode, we spoke about how the escalation from a tier 3 actor to a tier 2 level type of criminal is quick. It's swift. They're definitely related. The tier 3 characteristics of the troll, the addict, the opportunist, and the 7 deadly sins are gateways to tier 2 type of malevolent behavior. But we haven't discussed tier 1 to any type of depth at all. So what I want to do today is take time to discuss tier 1 in a little bit more depth, not a whole lot, because I would like the culmination effect to be a little bit more drastic. And why is that? Well, because I think in order to convince people that I'm not just providing some sort of, I don't know, in modern days, everything's turned into some sort of political point of view. This is not like a political statement or political stance. It's simply an observation of and trying to use some simple metrics that most people can understand to demonstrate that a lot of the things and a lot of the groups and a lot of the people who act against our best interests, against society's best interests, are operating right in front of us. That we have to make a decision, one, to stop participating in that type of behavior. And two, that eventually we need to confront these entities. Tier 1, however, is a special case because those are where the real evil people reside. And you might say, well, is that the devil? Is that a dragon? No, they're entities that you would assume were trustworthy. So we'll go through the little formal writing. I'll interject if I feel I need to, and then we'll wrap this up again. But today is a tier 1 intro. We're going to talk about some really shady and malevolent characters. I only have 2 examples, but it's not going to take long for the snowball effect to begin and start to involve and wrap itself around a bunch of entities or groups that should be trustworthy, that we should rely upon, and we do, but we probably shouldn't. It's not the way it used to be, or at least the way we were told it's supposed to be, as far as how these entities function. All right, so tier 1 characteristics. In tier 1, what I believe is about, I don't know, 10% of the population has some sort of malevolent trait that is outside of their control, or that they choose to participate in, or for whatever reason that they are a part of. So I just assume anytime I'm walking around in public or I'm dealing with people, 1 out of 10 people doesn't have something good for me. However, like, most of those people aren't necessarily a threat. If you're on the lookout, if you're trying to protect yourself, if you're just aware, you can kind of avoid those situations with them. But there's another special case. Within that 10%, there's a 1%ers. And what I'm going to discuss today is a segment of the 1%ers. So we have tier 3. We have tier 2, and I've obscured a bunch of stuff because we're not going to talk about them just yet. The next episode is these guys right here. But we're talking about tier 1 motherfuckers right there. And so within the tier 1, there are 2 larger groupings. The first category are the 1%ers. They're at the top. They're the creme de la creme of evil. Under the 1%ers, there are two specific groups. These 2 groups, the 1%ers, make up just 1% of all malevolent actors. However, because their impact is so disproportional, they end up at the top of the list. And once I start speaking about the examples, we're going to outline some of the entities, some of the characters that fall into that tier. These 1% of malevolent entities, like they represent literally probably less than 1% of the total human population, but they impact probably 99%. The rest of us, they probably impact the rest of us in some way, in a negative way. So what are their characteristics? Malevolency is a way of life. So these folks, the 10%, of the 10%, 9%, they have a characteristic that they live by, that isn't bound in any type of good. It's bound to evil or to bad, or however you want to perceive that. In that group, there are the 1%ers, and those people operate in pure malevolency. Like they don't have a different perspective. They don't have just a bad trait that caused them to be a bad person. They're just bad people. I don't care if I'm talking about your dad or your mom, because you're going to see yourself here, or you're going to see people you know there, and you probably care about them, and you're going to call me a liar for saying that they belong to this group. But bring the evidence and bring your argument, because what I'm saying is that if it wasn't this way, I wouldn't be able to make an argument. And so these people walk around with just pure and malintentioned actions in their head at all times. These are the 1%ers, and to a lesser degree, the other 9% that are in tier 1. All right. What's next? They prefer to do wrong in the face of good, in the face of God, in the face of the universe, and they disregard routes to better behavior. So that all tiers have that in common. That's me, that's you, that's anybody, right? We all make mistakes. We all fall short. I think I've heard it said that the word sin means to fall short. It's what are they called? Archery term. It means to miss the bullseye, to miss the mark, to fall short, sin. So if you miss the bullseye, you're a sinner, you sinned. That means you missed the mark. You fell short of the established goal or the standard as far as behavior is concerned when we move it over into the context of how we conduct ourselves. And of course, it applies to a religious context as well. So anyway, we all have our dark components, and that's what that line's about. Is there's no escaping the scale of darkness. We all participate, but to what degree? Another characteristic of the 10%, the tier 1 motherfuckers, they are bona fide psychopaths. That means that for the most part, they have no level of empathy, no level of sympathy. They can turn that off at will. Unlike you and I, who tend to feel guilty for doing something wrong, mostly, these people can just shut that shit off. Or they don't have it. And the people that don't have it tend to be more in the 1 percentile, as opposed to the larger 10% group in tier 1. So they're bona fide psychopaths. So the 1%ers, definitely psychopaths. Always rationalize actions as necessary. So these people are going to paint their actions as necessary. I need to do this for you. I need to do it in this way because it's beneficial to you. They're always they are always justifying what they do every step of the way. They use the law, they use their lawyers, they use manipulative practices, they use mass media campaigns, they use all kinds of tools and levers to leverage their power over individuals and large groups of people, with the intent of extracting something from them in a non-legitimate way, or in a legitimate way that has been given to them by some sort of authority. But it's all smokes and mirrors. Of course, we know that it's just an evil hoax. It's a prank. They're still doing evil shit. They just put the cross on it, or they put this label of religion on it, and said God said it's permissible, or the government said it's permissible, when we know they're full of shit. And that's what that means. They always rationalize their actions as necessary. I need to do this for you. And lastly, nearly always a victimizer as opposed to a victim. However, they continue to claim victimhood. And so they play this who's in world. They're psychopaths, right? So they victimize these people and then they say, oh, why are you mad at me for doing that for you? Now I'm just trying to help and you're trying to change the law. So now that I can't provide that service to you. I mean, it's a mental mind fuck. It's a pretzel of victimization or victim mentality. I don't understand these folks. They have all the power, all the resources, all the comfort in the world, and it's not enough. And they need yours. They need to hurt you. They need to victimize you in order to make themselves feel whole somehow. Okay, so I've gone through the characteristics. There's one more note here, and that says Tier 1 characters make up 10% of the population on the scale of darkness and account for 90% of the suffering on the planet. So once if you operate in Tier 1 or Tier 2, I mean, you could definitely be an evil motherfucker. Of course, in Tier 2. Tier 3, whatever. You still got some work to do there. But if you're operating in Tier 2, you're definitely probably some sort of evil, some sort of bad guy, right? But there's the road to redemption in Tier 2 is probably more clear. There's probably a easy route there. There's probably some adjustments you need to make, some improvement. Maybe you owe a debt to society in some form, and there's a way to provide restitution for that. In Tier 1, the leap from bad to good is much, much harder. I mean, there's redemption. Redemption is available to everybody. But if you operate in Tier 1 for any amount of time, the way back becomes not insurmountable, but very challenging. I'm not going to talk about examples of that today, but we'll get into all of that. So Tier 1 folks create 90% of the suffering. The Tier 2 and Tier 3 folks, again, the severity and the proportion, they don't have the scale. They can't scale well because they're making mistakes. We're living our lives and learning as we go. And yeah, some of us are raised as criminals, but then we find a different path, or we should find a better path, etc., etc. These Tier 1 fucks, they're the ones that create most of our problems. I think you've heard it. I don't know if you've heard it, but in your community, let's say you have 100 crimes. Well, those 100 crimes are probably only committed by a few people. The rest of the crimes, the majority of those crimes are probably committed by a few people, but the rest of the crimes are committed by everybody else, right? So you got 70% of the crime committed by 6 folks, and then you got 40% available to, the masses. And so it's disproportional. I'll make one mistake, but the next guy, because he's a fucking dirtbag and he's a criminal, a hardcore criminal, he'll do 10 crimes. So, and he'll probably provide 100 victims as opposed to my one. And that's how it works with these folks. And I'm gonna explain it, and hopefully it makes sense once I finish giving the formal portion of this introduction. Here we go. We've been discussing Tier 3 and Tier 2 criminals. At this point, we've been focusing on Tier 2 and the malevolent characters in that domain. We keep referencing Tier 1, but we haven't discussed it very well at all. Who is up there in Tier 1? Today, in the interest of clarity, we'll perform a Tier 1 intro. Hopefully it will provide better definition to the direction in which we are directing this conversation. I'd like you to see the destination of these talks so you can formulate your own ideas around the concept of the scale of darkness and determine if you are a participant, a victim, a good guy, a perpetrator, or determine whatever the multitude of roles you can play here. I'd like to use these examples to define what the word severity, proportion, and impact might mean in my mind, and why I view the scale the way I do. I'd like to align the words and analogies, since there are many ways to parse a tiering system of the type that I'm offering. Here, I'll provide a minor discussion on Tier 1 entities. As I've stated previously, for some reason, the higher up the scale of darkness you go, the more people tend to fall into groups rather than perform their vile deeds as individuals. So, in yesterday's example, it's not on here, but we were sewing up all these guys, right? It was the community criminals, the immoral criminals, and the vandals. And if you think about this DUI guy, the cyber guy, the drug dealer, the drug manufacturers, porn people, gamblers, prostitutes, pimps, vandals, they tend to operate as individuals. These are like individual crimes. Of course, we can lump them all together, but they aren't not necessarily working together. They just happen to be doing the same crime, and so we put them in the same group. As you go further up, though, and probably starting, maybe not here, but up here, you're going to see that these are definitely all groups. This is all groups. There are no individuals right here. I think this is all groups. And here's a mix, right? You start moving from the individual crime to crime that requires more than one person or can only be performed by groups of individuals. And so once you get to tier 1, the top tier, these groups here, these are all very, very large groups. So the groups grow larger as you go up the tiering system. And because of that, because it's a bunch of people working together towards a malevolent deed, and the impact and the proportion is much, much worse. It's way more severe. So as you go up the scale, you're going through escalation of your crime or your dirty deeds. The severity gets much worse, of course, right? There's more groups, there's more people performing evil shit. The severity increases because there's more death, right? Minor infractions here, a big deal of infractions there. The cross, the skull and bones there, that's represents the body count. And up here, you can see there's way more bodies. There's just way more suffering. There's more malevolence here, just in general. In tier 1, these groups are disproportionately harmful, not simply because of their resources, because in so many instances they are enabled by not a veil, but a true shield of legitimacy bestowed by a legitimate government, a benevolent God, or another credible entity that people are convinced is trustworthy. These authoritative institutions are supposedly legitimized by either the people, as practiced in Western democracies, or through God, as exercised broadly in the Middle East and other regions of the world. So the government, God, some big entity says, hey, this behavior is permissible. We're supposed to do it this way. Trust us. We're the government. You've heard that before. Regardless of the pseudo-legitimacy of the entity, people, in general, trust the authority bestowed upon the governing entity, either through a democratic process, by God, or otherwise. This trust, however, is frequently, if not almost always, leveraged in a way that robs people of any true hope of the maximization of any type of freedom. Tier 1 entities are the criminals disguised as the help. Criminals legitimized by governing entities, or the governing entity itself being in direct cooperation with criminal entities who are provided top cover by government and leaders in the form of laws, regulations, and or the forgiveness of God. So basically, the government making laws to allow criminals to commit crime, or using God as the measuring stick to permit them to extend their behavior, to cross boundaries in a legitimate way, in a moral fashion, which it doesn't make sense, but that's how they pitch it. Types of malevolency, tier 1 types of malevolency, Tier 1 types of malevolency demonstrates that virtually no governing entity has the people's best interest in mind. Here are a couple of examples that scratch the surface of this concept. The tier 1 example I will use today comes from the corporations cluster. Okay, so clusters, group, interchangeable. Categories, however, okay, so you got tiers. The first level under tiers are categories, and of course under the categories are all the groups or clusters, however you want to picture that. And so you have tier 1, the 1%ers. Under the 1%er, you have murderers, and then the cluster of corporations falls right under there. They're third from the top. Now there's two entities that are way more evil than these guys, but they're all the same essentially. But once I explain the order and why some supersede others, you'll see why. Because remember, a corporation requires top cover, so the top cover doesn't provide. I mean, the corporation doesn't provide the top cover, so you can see why they're subordinate to somebody else. The corporation cluster falls into Tier 1 under the major category of the one percenters. The second to last overall group on the scale of darkness are murderers. So, second to last meaning you have the one percenters, you have the murderers, but there's another branch here from the one percenters. So these are the 0.01% people. These are the truly fucking just crazy fucks, don't care, they're born that way. Like, there's no subgroup there, because like, even though they're at the top and they're the worst of the worst by themselves, you know, I think the universe should offer them some level of forgiveness, because they're probably born that way. And these are likely just individuals, not entities, just people who are born fucked up. And so maybe I should put these above them, but you know, I put them by themselves because they're never going to do any good. They're evil all the time. They're just born that way. But these fuckers have a choice, so they're not letting them off the hook. These types of murders are either some type of homicidal maniac, the 0.01%, or an entity that facilitates loss of human life on a mass scale. Mostly the one percenters murders grouping contains mass murder types of groups. We'll keep it light today and briefly discuss the medical industry. Within the medical industry are the subcategories of, there are many subcategories of evil fucks. So, parsing the corporations, you could probably on your own develop a list of evil companies that you know in your head. I'm going to take a sector, the medical sector. Even mentioning just the medical sector, you could probably think of companies there that are evil on their own. So we could just talk about the opioid crisis. Walking the dog on that, we can take a different medical sector of the mental health, right? That's a subsector of the medical industry. And that's who we're going to talk about today. That's the example I have. I heard a story yesterday. I thought it was a good example of the types of things that I'm talking about. All right, we'll keep it light today and briefly discuss the medical industry. Within the medical industry are many subcategories of evil fucks. We'll discuss a small segment of the mental health industry within the medical community. According to an investigative report published in the New York Times, just go with the source. It was valid, and written by Jessica Silver Greenberg. A company called Acadia Health is legally defrauding the healthcare system to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. Technically, Acadia Health is not committing fraud because their behavior is enabled by the law, the legislative branch, a tier 1 entity. So there you go. We're going to start to drop some clues onto who other tier 1 entities are, because they're intrinsically linked. They are not uncoupled. Through a bunch of technicalities, this corporation is involuntarily committing mental health patients. So they're committing them they're institutionalizing them. Legally, they can only hold a person involuntarily for 72 hours, unless they petition the court to hold the patient longer, and they frequently do. Once this petition is filed, it essentially restarts the clock, because the patient can be held involuntarily until the court holds a hearing to determine if the provider has a legitimate reason to hold the patient longer. In over 4,500 cases in one small part of North Florida, less than 1%, exactly 54, of patients had an involuntary extension approved. So what does that mean? So Acadia Health submitted over 4,500 petitions to hold people longer than the 72-hour hold, and were only approved about 1% of the time, which means that they were bogus. Like, it's a scam. It's readily apparent that there was no real reason to hold 99%, not hardly any of them, almost none of them, But they submitted it anyway. Why? Because once they submitted the petition, it restarted the clock, and we'll get into why they do that. Acadia Healthcare knew that their petition to hold the patient longer was highly likely to get rejected, but knew that by submitting the petition to the court to hold the patient longer, that Acadia could extend the patient's stay a few more days at a minimum. Why would they do that? Because they could bill the insurance company for the additional days at the cost of $2,200 per day, as was the case in the example patient that the New York Times interviewed. With a minimum stay of 72 hours and likely an involuntary extension in the form of a bogus court petition, the company could generally make over $10,000 per patient per incident. Acadia doctors would willfully misdiagnose the patient to legitimize the initial involuntary hold. Acadia worked with ERs to coordinate mental health care referrals to Acadia facilities and chastised their own Acadia employees for not diagnosing patients with a condition that would necessitate an involuntary mental care facility hold. Essentially, a person with a mental condition that did not require hospitalization was involuntarily institutionalized in order to extract tens of thousands of dollars from their insurance company. And the insurance company are a tier 1 criminal. They're part of the problem, and we'll discuss them at length later. No one has gone to jail. No one has been fined. No one is in trouble. All of this is legitimized by government. Tier 1, the government in general, falls in the tier 1 category. This is the definition of a tier 1 malevolent entity. They are ruining people's lives by involuntarily institutionalizing patients in need of non-critical mental health care services and holding them against their will under the guise of providing help for a patient in mental distress. In reality, they are holding a hostage and exacerbating what likely was only a minor mental health condition. The patient is now stigmatized, likely out of work, and also likely traumatized by the entire experience of being held captive by a medical entity that is designed to assist people in crisis, not designed to exacerbate or even create new mental health conditions, which is what is happening with Acadia Health. The second example I'll use is one I ran into today. I have my dental care through the VA at the moment. I receive a teeth cleaning once a year from the VA, which I appreciate. So I'm more than willing to spend some money at the 6-month mark to get my teeth cleaned on my own because dental hygiene is important. When I called the dentist, however, commercial dentist, not the VA, blah, 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 I don't have dental insurance. They told me I could not pay for simply a dental cleaning out of pocket because by law they're required to take x-rays first. The total process just to get my teeth cleaned, because they have to include x-rays, is closer to $600. So I don't know how much it costs just to get your teeth cleaned. They wouldn't tell me. I assume it's not more than $100, $150 maybe, and maybe that's generous to them, being generous to them. We can't pass laws to protect people from unscrupulous medical facilities who are leveraging their power and their understanding of the judicial and insurance systems to make tens of billions of dollars in profit off of involuntarily committed patients. And there are laws that prevent me from getting my teeth cleaned unless I fork over more money than is actually required by the procedure I need. How could anyone believe that a system like this is on the side of good? Why would I ever believe that these types of people are ever operating in good faith? And that's what we need to keep at the forefront of our mind, is that these are, I'm calling them entities, but there are people who are operating this thing. We just call them entities because we're giving them a proper boundary so you know who's in there. So if I say legislative branch, you know who that is. Those are the people that create the laws supposedly to help people. If I say the judicial branch, you already know I'm talking about the justice system. If I say the executive, I'm talking about the people who run the country, the president, the prime ministers, etc., etc. If I say corporations, that's companies, and the people that run them, right? Whose best interest, whose only interest is profit. They care about the shareholder, not the stakeholder. Give a fuck less about us. Amongst other entities, and I mentioned the insurance companies. They're a tier 1 entity because I'm pretty sure everybody has the experience where you pay your premium and you go to use it, and they make it hard, even though it's clear outlined in their policy that they can, but you didn't read the 100-page fine print pamphlet that is supplemented in your insurance policy, and that they get away with because our law creators, our legislators, allow them to get away with it. No other reason. And they're in cahoots. And that is an example of a tier 1 entity, a tier 1 criminal. You can see that there's like an ecosystem that enables these folks to get away with. In this case, it's not murder. We're going to get into that, where murder is literally enabled by the law, enabled by a religious institution, enabled by a legitimate entity. These are criminals who are operating under the protection of our governments, our gods, the universe, however this works. Of course, the universe doesn't permit that. We know the real deal. We understand that they will have to answer to something or somebody. And they don't, although they preach that, right? Because these people tend to also preach, they have a book, it's designed to control. They misrepresent the truths in it because, of course, I think there's actually something legitimate to faith and the Bible and the Quran and the Torah, etc., etc., etc. But man has obfuscated the truths, just like I've obfuscated the other categories on this page. I mean, they're on there, but like you can't read shit because we blurred it on purpose so you couldn't see it. Well, that's what they do to us with the good books. They hide the truth. They obfuscate the facts because then they would have to hold themselves to a higher standard. But isn't that the case with any leader? Isn't that the responsibility of any leader to hold themselves to a higher standard, to be the example? I don't know where you draw your leadership philosophy from, but there are different schools of thought on leadership and leadership capability. But I think, generally speaking, most of us can agree to the idea that our leaders should be setting the example, and our leaders should be setting a positive example, somebody to aspire to, not somebody to aspire to so that we can gain protection from the system, I guess, and we can line our pockets. The incentive structure is horrific. The way we live our modern lives, and the capability, the ability for these types of entities appear to exist that are defrauding people. They're costing the taxpayer billions of dollars. They are creating a bunch of damaged citizens, which simply perpetuates the cycle. And they're only increasing suffering. The more this exists, the longer this exists, the more legitimacy that this gains, the worse that this goes. The problem is, like, I ran out of room on the paper because there's no limit to these people's depravity. I don't understand, and they're enabled. They get away with it because it's legit in their industry to do whatever the heck. You could talk about pollution, and you don't have to believe in global warming to believe in overfishing, or to believe that there are microplastics and everything. You don't have to be a tree hugger to understand that the air is so polluted in certain parts of the world, in most industrialized countries, that is now creating a bunch of different health ailments, cardiovascular health ailments for the populations that live there. You don't have to believe all that. Go look it up. There are people who would argue against it, but again, you have to look at who's paying them. What are the incentives for them to say what they are saying? These tier 1 entities are criminal. and frequently they're disguised as help. I don't think that this type of system is sustainable. Eventually something's going to break, and if we don't understand our power in this situation, we're bound to lose all that power, because as it stands, fighting these big entities, we don't have individually, most of us don't have any resources like that. Fucking middle class, you're either renting your house, you have one mortgage on one house, you don't have money to buy two. You have one car or two cars, you have a dog, and you have you go out to eat on occasion. You are not Bill Gates. Most of us aren't on that level. And so what happens when you don't have that type of power? The only power we have, there's a quality and quantity all its own, is what I've heard. And that quantity is the people. That's us. That's me and you. That's you and I working together to agree on some ideas. And right now that's hard to do. We're polarized, especially in the West here, with the different, left leaning ideology and the right leaning ideology, when in reality most of us kind of converge in the same, mostly in the same Venn diagram of agreements, right? We're in agreements. And the tier one entities like to stir the pot and convince us that we are separate and not together, and they do that so that they can keep doing what the fuck they're doing. And the exercise here, of course, is to get us to improve our own behavior, but also shine a light, try to put a spotlight on some of the mechanisms they're using to divide us. There are way smarter people than me talking about this stuff, and I enjoy listening to them. I wish I was smarter. That's like if I had a genie, right? If I got the genie in the bottle, that's one of the things I would wish for, is like all the knowledge, give it to me. I happen to think that maybe there's new schools of thought coming out on what is contained inside our bodies, inside us as a living entity. And one of those thoughts is that maybe we have all the knowledge within us. Maybe it's literally built into our DNA. When you have the ability to save billions of pieces of information in DNA, which is a fact. Why is that there? That's my question. Like, why would that exist if it didn't have some level of potential beyond creating a being like you and me, a very unique being like you and me, however, a thinking being that can come to some agreements with other beings, right? We can start to agree on what information is true, what the truth is, and what is legitimate, or even formulate new ideas to expand the truth or negate truths, right? We go through that all the time. That's what science is about. But there's just convergence at the moment where I wish I could remember all the names and all the podcasts and all the articles. I'm simply not good at that. Well, at least not yet. But they were talking about how science was in the business of dispelling the myths and the magic that was involved in religion. And I'll be honest, I was on that train. But now you have the science that's starting to maybe demonstrate or prove that our religions and that our faith-based thinking is actually legitimate, and the science is true. So there's this crossroads at the moment where the science is starting to prove the religious aspects, and the religious aspects reinforces the science to some degree, and they're again starting to create this synergy, right? Like the yin and the yang, the plain hard truths of it and the abstract, the science and the faith and the religion or whatever. And I think religion is very different from spirituality and faith. It's anyway, that's a different conversation. But if we can agree that some of these things are bad for us, that we can start to, I don't know, maybe vote these people out. I have no fucking clue how to solve this shit. But I think it's important that we agree on to who the bad guys are, who is not working in concert with society, who is not on your side. I have a billion examples. We're going to go through it some more. I'm going to close it up for today. But I appreciate you.